All right, so so you make your own YouTube channel and put it up there. I think a lot of people are depressed by that. Like, oh man, so now I got to make a hit. Like, I got to do all this work. To me, it's hopeful because now you're not putting your career on Finding Me and hoping that I give you pity and mercy. You're in charge of your own career. Like, you can do it. You get your ass off and make your show, and then I'll come to you. Then, you know what I'm saying? That it changes the power dynamic. Your future is more in your hands than you realize. You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin. Okay, everyone, welcome back to Screenwriters Need to Hear This. Today, Phil, we're talking about, the title of today's episode is Here's My Script, Make My Show. Because I get this comment a lot on TikTok. Like, people say, like, hey, I got a script. How do I submit it? How do I get people to shoot it? Hollywood, where's my money? And it's a little naive. It's a little, I think, it's a little offensive. It's a little dismissive into how much work we all do. Yeah. Like, whatever, you can type, here's my script. Why don't, it's as good as the you put on the air. Well, I guess I'm not supposed to curse, but whatever. It's as good as the stuff you put on the air.
We've talked about this before, and I think, when I was a young writer, I thought that too. It's like, I have an idea and I want to be a professional writer, so I need to go sell something. I remember I was managing a bunch of delis in Utah at the time, and this producer came in and they impressed me with their aluminum business card, and I was like, oh man, this is pretty cool. And I told them, you want to be a screenwriter? And they're like, oh, tell me what you're writing. And I gave him the worst pitch of my life, and then gave him his corned beef on rye, and then never heard from them again.
Yeah.
But in my head, I thought I was ready to pitch that script. I didn't have a log line ready. It didn't have a third act. Right. But in my head, I was like, oh, this is my shot. I'm going to make it in Hollywood.
Right. So there it is. So, I did a post on this because some guy really wanted to, he really thought that, he's like, my case was that if you want to make it in Hollywood, as a TV writer, you should rise up the ranks, see if you can get a job as a PA, as a writer's assistant, work your way up to writer, and then slowly climb the ladder to showrunner and hopefully pitch and sell your own show. And his point was like, well, sure, but there's a lot of examples where that's not the case, where people come out of the blue and just get their show on the air. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's discuss this. This is a good topic for discussion. Name a few shows that work that way. And then I got radio silence, like nothing, But then someone else left a comment listing a couple of shows, and I go, okay, good. This is a good example. Let's talk about that. And so, well, first, real fast, I know I mentioned this in an earlier podcast, so I'm going to blow through this, I'm sorry to repeat this, but there are approximately the same number of writers, active writers in television working today as there are players in the NFL. So you're talking about people competing at the highest levels, and and it's not like those players just show up to the first day, they don't show up to the stadium on Sunday and say, hey, coach, I'm really good at catching a ball, put me in. It just, It doesn't work that way. These people have been practicing since they were kids in grade school, and then they went to play in high school, and they learned the fundamentals, blocking, tackling, and running routes. And then hopefully they're good enough to play in college. And the ones who were good enough in college, maybe they got invited to the combine, and maybe they tried out, and maybe they were scouted, and then maybe they were drafted. And then maybe if they were drafted, they made the cut of the team. Maybe they just made the practice squad. And so it's that long journey. It's kind of the same thing if you want to have your own TV show. It's a long journey, and you have to kind of start with fundamentals. You have to learn how to write. You have to learn, you got to take a class. You have to practice every day, write every day, study, watch TV shows and take notes. You have to approach it as if you were trying to make the NFL,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you referenced this earlier, you made the point, you're not just competing with every other person who has any idea to be a screenwriter or thinks they can be a screenwriter. You're competing with every professional writer that is out there, because all of those people are also looking for those jobs.
Yeah. If you're gunning for my job, and you are, that's okay. You got to bring your A game, because, you want to knock me off the hill. I'm not going to go off without a fight.
I wonder how much of our audience who listens to this podcast or follows you really watch sports. It doesn't seem there are a lot of writers who do. I think Steve Lemmy from our Tacoma FD, he made a reference, none of the writers on our show are writers. They're guys who like football and beer and that kind of stuff. It was pretty funny. But I think to that point, you're basically competing for the starter quarterback position. And I make this reference, in college football, like the good schools who get those 5-star blue chip recruits are really good. The schools that they don't really play very well and they don't get a lot of attention. And then there are those people who are like Heisman candidates. In the NFL, everyone's a Heisman candidate, every single one of them. And I think it's a mistake to think as well here, like everyone who is working at that level is competing at the top of the game. You're in the top 1.1% of 1% here.
It's funny you mention that number. Because I'm going to talk more about that. But yeah, that's how I feel. And so the comment that someone left, which I thought is a fair comment, was like, well, what about Insecure? What about Issa Rae on HBO's show Insecure? Like, because she didn't rise through the ranks as a writer. I'm like, okay, good. Let's just talk about that. So I went on, I don't watch that show, but I obviously know of her. And I went on IMDb and I looked up that show. And so she didn't create it. She co-created that show with Larry Wilmore. And so she didn't get it. So what happened, her backstory is, and it's the public backstory. She made a very public, she had a very successful YouTube channel and she had a couple of YouTube programs, apparently. Some were funded, but the only reason she got those, it's just she had high viewers, she had like good numbers and subscribers and all that. And it was because she started her own. Like she didn't say, hey, Hollywood, here's my script. Give me a show. Let me be a writer. She did it all herself. She's, she wrote and produced her own and directed and starred in her own stuff and built up a following. And then eventually it got so big, apparently, that Shonda Rhimes discovered her YouTube channel. Hey, here's somebody, or at least somebody from her company did. Hey, look at this woman. And the first thing that happens when that, like, again, I don't know the personal history of it, but I just know from my experience, someone from the production company probably went and saw her YouTube page. And the first thing they looked at was the number of views and subscribers and all that. Like that, just give me the numbers. Oh, okay, she's got a big audience. All right, now let me look to see if it's any good. Right? It's like, so obviously the most important thing is how many people, how many fans, how many people are interested in what she's got. And then, then they watch, oh, she's really good. She's talented. She's, she's a good writer. She's a good performer. Oh, and she has a built-in audience. Now Shonda develops a show for her, pitches it, apparently didn't sell, which is not uncommon. And if you can't sell your show with Shonda, that must have been really depressing for Issa Rae, because if the biggest writer, the most talented writer in Hollywood can't get your show on the air, then what? And so I imagine she was depressed and dejected, and she dusted herself off and got back to work, putting out more writing, more producing, doing all that until she got discovered again this time by Larry Wilmore, probably the same kind of thing. And then he co-created the show with her, and he went to and so someone saw that and said, okay, like even then she can't get her own show. She has to co-create it with somebody. She needs the experienced writing, writer. So that's how Larry Wilmore got her show. He rose through the ranks. He's one of the most well-liked and well-respected, talented writer, producers in Hollywood. Most people know him as an on-air personality because he's a performer on The Daily Show and Bill Maher, and he had his own show for a while. But he's also very active behind the scenes as a writer-producer. That's probably what he does more of, actually. And so he decided, hey, okay, I'm gonna take my shot. I'm gonna develop with her. So that's how he got his show on, or co with her by rising through the ranks. Then he teamed up with her, and that's also like that process. I'm sure is a mystery to a lot of people. So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about like how that probably went down.
Yeah, and this is just reminding me. And I know we've talked about this privately as well. Everybody loves Raymond. Everyone's like, oh, Ray Romano, that's his show. And one of the first books I bought related to writing was You're Lucky You're Funny by Phil Rosenthal. It's his memoirs, and he's the co-creator of Everybody Loves Raymond. And he came in, and it's a mix of their lives and their experiences, and Ray's out there writing, but he's also performing, and Phil's the guy behind the scenes, and Phil's like one of the biggest writer producers as well. But it's the same thing. They got paired up to make this show.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to do it on your own. You need. So like in her case, I imagine someone saw her show and said, hey, there's a lot of really good stuff here. She got a big following. It's not quite ready for TV. Let's team her up with a writer, a showrunner, and fashion this into a TV show. And so how that step usually works, and again, I'm not privy to the specifics of that show. I just been on a bunch of these meetings, so this is how it usually works, is that they, like a manager or a production company will team up someone like Issa Rae, someone talent, so like on-air talent, someone who's built this following, and try to pair them with a showrunner. And so at that point, it's like a date. It's when you go on a date, you don't say, okay, let's go on a second date. You both have to decide to go on a second date.
Right.
One person doesn't get to say they go on a second date. And
that's called stalking, right?
Yeah, right. That's a crime. So how it usually goes is they would probably set up a meeting with a half dozen or so high-level writers, maybe some mid-level writers as well. And it's, you call in this meeting and you want to see, is it a good fit? Does Issa Rae, does she like the writing style of this showrunner? Does she feel like the showrunner gets her sensibility and will help her realize her vision as opposed to the other way around? And, similarly, you want the showrunner is going to say, okay, I'm going to develop with this talent. It's going to take months and months and months of work. There's no guarantee we're going to sell the show, and we're going to pitch it. Maybe it'll sell, but I don't get paid until it sells.
Yeah. That's something that was really shocking to me, because I think you just assume like, oh, I'm writing, and the Writers Guild protects people from writing, doing free rewrites and free work. And you're like, no, like I write a pilot. I mean, I have no idea how many pilots you and your writing partner Seaver write, but it seems like you're constantly developing pilots with people every year to take out and sell and shop. And you're doing that for free. You're doing that on spec, hoping you're going to sell that and then cash your check when it sells. To pilot, let alone make it to air.
Right. And so that's why when people reach out to me, this happens sometimes, hey, I got a script where I just need a showrunner. And I'm like, dude, you need a lot more than a showrunner. Your script is not enough. You got to bring more to the table. Issa Rae brings a lot more to the table than a script. She's on air. She's a good performer. She's a good writer, but she also has millions of people following her who want to watch whatever she's doing.
The trifecta.
It doesn't hurt that she's also beautiful, by the way, So, not that that's critical, because there are people who are in Hollywood who are unconventionally beautiful, but it certainly doesn't help that, when you're good looking on the eyes, it definitely helps. So by the way, so if you're not, beautiful, don't panic. There's still hope for you. There's plenty of, ugly people working. So she brought a lot to the table. So if you just have a script and, I just need a showrunner, I was like, no, dude, you need more than a showrunner. You got to do more. And the funny thing is, like, all right, so you make your own YouTube channel and put it up there. I think a lot of people are depressed by that. Like, oh man, so now I got to make a hit. Like, I got to do all this work. To me, it's hopeful, because now you're not putting your career on finding me and hoping that I give you pity and mercy. You're in charge of your own career. Like, you can do it. You get your ass off and make your show, and then I'll come to you. Then what I'm saying, that it changes the power dynamic. Your future is more in your hands than you realize. Like, if you can create, but then some people are like, well, but it's so hard to make a hit YouTube show. Well, damn right, yes, it is. Right. Of course it is. It's not supposed to be easy.
There's a threshold. And, I have a bunch of data on YouTube and all of this stuff from my background in digital marketing. And just to kind of put some statistics out there for people, the CEO of Google in 2008, I can't remember if Google had bought YouTube at the time, but just kind of give you their view of the internet. He said that the entirety of man's knowledge is duplicated every 2 days. That's how much information is being generated. And they view the internet as a cesspool of information. That's the term they used in 2008. Fast forward to 4K on your iPhone, and I think the data I last saw was something like 24 hours of videos uploaded to YouTube every second. Mm-hmm. So Google doesn't even treat your video as valuable until you have like 300 views. They don't even care, because there's a threshold to get through all of the cesspool and the muck that exists there. Yeah. And it's hard. 300 doesn't seem like a lot, but that's hard to do consistently. That's hard. And we've talked about this before. Great, good, right? Because that means there's a level of work most people will never put in. They're not going to put in the effort. And that makes it easier for me, not harder. Yeah. As long as I'm consistent and I do my work.
Yeah. And if you learn your craft, right? Like, so if you're like, well, I don't know how to write well, take a course, take a writing course. This is all good. A lot of people don't want to do that. Most people don't want to do that. Yeah. Then someone also left a comment, so I'll respond to this as well, was that like, well, what about Broad City? So Broad City's, it's a similar situation. Those two women had a show on YouTube, based on very similar to their show. And it was discovered It became, kind of a viral hit. It got discovered by Amy Poehler, or at least someone at her company, and they decided that I think, this is from what I gather from looking at the credits and all that, that they decided they could shop it without having a showrunner attached, that it was close enough in form that they didn't need a showrunner. And that's kind of unusual, but it does happen sometimes where they were able to sell it without a showrunner. But then when it gets picked up by the network to go to series, then they assign a showrunner, because they're still not going to trust. They're not going to put all that capital. These are expensive to make shows. They're not going to trust people who haven't done it before. So they found a showrunner at that point to pair up with them, who helped run the show for 2 years, who helped make their vision. But again, the showrunner obviously came up through the ranks, and at that point, there's another voice in the room, obviously. So it's not quite all entirely their show. It's still they have to mesh with the showrunner to make something that everyone can agree on, and the network would be happy with.
Hi guys, it's Michael Jamin. I wanted to take a break from talking and talk just a little bit more. I think a lot of you people are getting bad advice on the internet. Many of you want to break into the industry as writers or directors or actors, and some of you are paying for this advice on the internet. It's just bad. And as a working TV writer and showrunner, this burns my butt. So my goal is to flush a lot of this bad stuff out of your head and replace it with stuff that's actually going to help you. So I post daily tips on social media. Go follow me at Michael Jamin Writer. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And let's be honest, if you don't have time, like just 2 minutes a day towards improving your craft, it's not going to happen. So go make it happen for you at Michael Jamin Writer. Okay, now back to my previous rant.
It's like the pilot analogy, right? We've got this multiple $1 million industry, and we're not just going to hand the keys to someone who's never flown before.
Yeah.
And it's everything. I mean, I have a friend who's an editor who has cut multiple seasons of television that people watch, and he got a bump to cut a feature film at a major studio, and they watched him like a hawk. Like the head of post at the studio was in his face for like 2 or 3 weeks, making sure he had what it took to do, to the point the guy thought he was going to get fired, despite the fact that he knows how to cut, obviously. But they didn't even trust him with this multi-million-dollar production until he proved he could do it.
Yeah. And you got it. It makes perfect sense to me.
It's business. It's business, right? And I think it goes back to this is a business, and you're dealing with millions and millions of dollars and thousands of people's livelihoods. I mean, just watch the credits at the end of a TV show or a film. Those are jobs. Those are real people with families, and they're not going to put all of that, let alone the capital of investors, on someone who's not proven to be able to handle that workload.
Yeah. And just because you have a script, like, I'm not even sure if anybody would want to work with that person, because they don't know, like, they're a wild card at that point. They don't know what they don't know. They might dig their heels in something. They might not know how to execute notes. They may fight fights that they don't need to fight. Like when I'm working on a show, there's certain battles I don't even make. If someone gives me something, a note that, all right, let them, if I feel like it's not going to hurt anything, let them have it. Why they can't fight every fight,
Yeah, I heard Roger Moore, I think is his name, who was the showrunner of Battlestar Galactica, and he's done a bunch of other stuff. The one where the girl goes back in time, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm gonna get eaten alive for not knowing his name. She goes back to like Scotland. Anyway, so he made a comment. He said, maybe it's not Roger Moore. I'll put his name in the show notes. But anyway, he said that if it's a lateral move, you get it. Meaning if it doesn't hurt the story, you win that battle all day. But if it makes the story better, I win. Like, and there's no argument there. I do what I need to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I feel the same exact way. And so of the 3 shows that my partner and I have run, like, we didn't even create those shows, but those shows were created by somebody else. But they were people who brought a lot to the table. They weren't people waving a script. So the first one was Glenn Martin DDS, and that was created by Michael Eisner. And if you don't know who he is, Google him, because he's like a big shot producer. He was a big shot executive at Disney many years ago. So it was his idea. He created the show, got it on the air. He was not a writer, so he hired 2 showrunners, me and my partner, to run it. So that's one. So, okay, but he's not a nobody. The second one was Marin on IFC. Marin is a very big comedian and has one of the largest followings on his podcast. His podcast is usually in the top 5 in the country. So he has a huge audience. So he's not a no one either. So he created the show, got it, bought, needed showrunners, needed people to run it for him, and that's how we got hired. And the last one was Rhett and Link's Buddy System. Again, these guys were not no ones. These were huge YouTubers with a huge following.
Didn't she say like, we can't go to Disneyland?
When I first met them, we had a meeting, and they're like, and they were very super sweet guys, very nice and down to earth. But he's like, I think it was Rhett saying we went to Disneyland this weekend with his kids there, and he hated it because he gets mobbed at Disneyland, like because all the kids know him. So in certain circles, he's incredibly famous, but out in my circles, I'm like, who are you? But
Jay from Broken Lizard just told me that story. He was on an episode of Nailed It, which is like the Netflix show where people botch baking. They're like the worst bakers. And he says, I am very popular with children age 8 to 12. I have had a lot of heavy breathing children at airports take selfies with me.
Yeah. So, but these are all people who bring a lot to the table. And so you got to bring more to the table than just your script. I say that over and over again. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's so important. What you really need to do then, and to build a following, obviously, like the only thing you really have control over in the beginning is the quality of your writing. But so many people would rather focus on other stuff. Like Phil, here's the thing. Like you were saying, the top 1.1%, or maybe it's less, of people are going to make it into the business. But the problem is, everyone thinks they're in the top 0.1%. Like if you everyone listening to this podcast thinks they're in the top 1.1%, and so obviously that's not the case.
Yeah. So I think we've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect, haven't we?
I don't remember. I don't listen to my show.
Yeah, no, I can't remember. I've had so many of these conversations recently, but the Dunning-Kruger effect, for those who don't know, is this process you go through where you start learning something, you learn a skill, right. You learn a little bit, and you think you know way more than you do.
Yeah.
And that inflated ego that comes from knowing just that much more than the rest of the population leads you to believe that, you have a skill set that you don't.
Right.
And then as you learn more, you dip back down into this world of I know nothing and I am garbage. And you stay there for a long time, even past the point where you actually are very competent. You still think you're not. And then you finally realize, like, okay, I am better than most people, but I still have a lot to learn. And it's learning what you don't know, I think, is kind of the key. But it seems like most people fall into this category, which, I did too. I get it. It's a logical fallacy that most people stumble into. You just think you're better than you actually are. And that's, I think, where writers groups and having, people you can trust, but more importantly, people who know what they're doing, giving you the right notes.
It's, now I remember because we did talk about this a little bit. And even when I first broke into the business, I never thought I was in the top 0.1% at all, ever. Yeah. I was like, I needed to learn a lot. And even now, when you first convinced me to do all this podcast and make the course, I was like, I don't know, Phil, what do I know? And you're like,
I got nothing to say. I've said it all. Like
I've said it all. I don't know anything because I still don't feel like I know anything.
I put it all in there. There's nothing else to say.
But it's because, you always compare yourself to there's certainly writers who are way more successful than I am. And so you're always like, well, I'm no Shonda Rhimes. So why am I talking?
I'm no Aaron Sorkin.
Right. Yeah, I'm not Aaron Sorkin. But they don't have a podcast. So screw it. You don't get Aaron Sorkin. He doesn't want to have a podcast. You get me.
Yeah. And I think you said something beautiful in one of our early episodes that, I may not be the guy you've heard of. Like, you may not be a no name, but look at me. I'm still kicking around 26 years later. So there's a longevity in what you're doing that, I just feel very blessed and appreciative that I've had the opportunity to know you personally as friends, really first before I knew you professionally. And now professionally, someone I see as a mentor because, you're just so real. And that's, I think, the biggest note that most people who interact with you online are. People take your course, people on social media. Like some guy just posted today on the episode we dropped today. He's just like, you seem like just a real good dude. Thank you for posting this. And I think that's something great. Like, you're not inaccessible. You're just a working writer, and you've been doing it so long that there's a resume that follows you around. It's undeniable. Like, you know what you're doing. you keep
Thank you.
working, right?
Yeah.
And that's valuable. I think people need to hear more of that, and there's definitely resources online that do that. But yeah, look, man, you're doing good stuff, and I think it shows in the way people are reacting and so appreciative in your social media.
Yeah, and it's actually been fun to I don't know, it's been fun for that. I did I know this is off topic, but I did a public reading on Sunday of I just read some story that I wrote. It's a bunch of writers got together and it was an outdoor event where everyone's reading stories, and so I posted this on my Instagram page. Hey, public reading, it's $5 a ticket. It's like nothing. Come if you want to see me, come. And some guy came, some guy who I didn't know, found me on Instagram. He's like, hey, and he shows up there and he's like, hey, I follow you on Instagram. I'm like, seriously? That's nice. So it's sweet. It's sweet to meet people like that.
Yeah.
Maybe
well,
feel good.
You're doing good stuff, and I think I go back to when I first got into this. Like I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was in 5th grade. Like I had to state of Oklahoma made us do a creative writing test, and I just fell in love with storytelling at that time,
Right.
even though it was probably really bad fan fiction of some show that I was watching at the time. But that's just I knew that's what I wanted to do, and then I got lost in the business world and like life, and then all this other stuff, and then ultimately like I stumbled back into writing and realizing, oh yeah, I can be a screenwriter, which is what I decided I wanted to do at the time when I was a kid. And the resources back then, and this was,
Right.
it's definitely not early internet. Like we're talking 2009, 2008, 2010, but the resources and the availability of resources just weren't there. And so, I mean, I just think back to where I would be today as a writer a decade plus later, had I just had something like your social media, let alone the course. Like had I just had that insight to like, this is what way it really works. I've got friends who listen to our podcast and they're just like, they're in Utah and they're in the industry there and they're doing good things. And like, it's fascinating to hear what it's really like in Hollywood. Right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I wish I was around when I was breaking in, because honestly, I was around before the internet. So good luck, man. Good luck. I mean, I just got lucky that I found someone who kind of was a retired writer, but like there was no one. There's no one out there. There's just no way to even get into that information. Honestly, there was no way. But now it's easier with social media.
It's prevalent, but there's also just a lot of bad advice, and
yeah,
and you see this all the time, and I'm along the path enough now that I see it too. It's like, okay, well, like there's a level of understanding, like these are moments we need. These are story points. There are specific plot points, whatever you want to call them. But then there's also like, okay, now we're being a little too formulaic. Why do I have to hit that on page 3? Why is it that I must do this at page 20, page 10? And I think what's beautiful about what you teach people is like, you can have your unique voice and your unique perspective, but these are moments that just need to happen to carry your story along. And then everything else that's happening is just your unique view of the world and the way your perspective on this. And it frees you up. It frees you up to be able to just write and not stress about that stuff.
It's so funny because, it's funny you say that, because when I'm writing this book, and it's when it comes out, when it gets published, I'll make an announcement so everyone can buy it, because I want people to buy it. So it's a collection of personal essays. And so I write the same way when I write these stories. I kind of break them very similarly to the way I break TV episodes, because I'm a TV writer. Like, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And a film writer. So I kind of think of story the same way. And I even said to my wife, and I go, I wonder if people are going to see that. I wonder if they're going to read my stories and they're going to say, oh, I get it. I get what he does here. And she's like, absolutely not. There's just no way.
Nope.
There's just no way.
No, and I have this conversation now with people, and they're like, oh, so I bet you think you know what's going to happen next. I was like, no, I'm shocked all the time in film and things. However, because I understand story points, I get a pretty good idea of where I'm at. Like I can tell timing. And now those conversations start with like, oh, can you like help me learn? I was like, I'm going to ruin film and television for you forever because I'm going to be able to tell you how to predict what's going on. Nah, still can't. Because a good story, good writing, you get so emotionally involved in it that you're not paying attention to story beats anymore. You're just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Like, oh, that's so incredible, the thing that I'm just seeing happen.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel the same exact way. We were watching a show called I always forget it was called The Great, about Catherine the Great on Hulu. And there was a scene that we watched last night where Catherine the Great gets his candles, and it was a gift from the Turkish people who I guess they were at war with, but it was a gift. And the scene ended with the candles. And it was kind of like, oh, isn't that nice? And then I said to my wife, we're watching, oh no, there's gonna be something wrong with those candles. It's gonna be poison. Because like you don't do a scene, you don't put candles, you don't end a scene, you don't put candles. There's gotta be a reason why they're putting these things in there, the candle there. Like it's not just, it didn't happen to show up on the screen. And so that's exactly what happened. We were laughing because it was like, oh, but it's not like I saw it coming, but I just know from story, like if you introduce something there, there's a reason. It's not just.
Yeah. That was like one of the, in one of my very first classes in film school, and they're talking about like, here's how film works. And we're talking about, all the different aspects of film, sound, we're talking about camera, we're talking about light. And then we start talking about mise en scène, which is like everything in the scene. And it's just like, and I just remember my teacher saying like, everything that you see in the shot is because the filmmaker wanted you to see it.
That's
it
exactly
tells
right.
you something about the character. It sets a mood. It builds. It is what is visually happening, and your brain's putting all that together without you even noticing it if it's done really well.
Yes.
And when I've gone back and studied scenes that I just love, and it's like, yeah, it is everything I'm seeing here is giving me this experience, and it's nothing's there by chance. Like if you put the gun in Act 1, right? You put the gun in Act 1, it better go off.
Go off in Act 3, right? But that's even more to the case when you're doing animation, because there is nothing there until it's drawn. Right. And it's also with sound, because there's no sound, there's no birds in the background until someone puts birds, So everything, and we were doing Marin. Sometimes we'd shoot a location all the time. So sometimes we would shoot like in a crack house or whatever. And I remember saying to the set decorator, was like, how much of this did you bring in, and how much of this was here before? And then you'd have a conversation.
Which hypodermic needles should I avoid? Which ones are rubber and which ones are not?
Yeah, but so that was always funny. But on other sets when we were decorating, for sure, there were conscious decisions. And even I remember I had lunch with the set designer years after Marin Wrap, and he was telling me something he added to the show that I didn't even notice. He didn't even tell me about it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty smart. Was that season 4 was all about Mark finding himself, because he was in recovery. He was addicted, and then he got out of rehab, and then he had to find himself. And so every time, this is so subtle, but in the background of the shots, whenever in the early season, in the episodes that were early in the season, you'd only see, every time he had a photograph in the background, it would be in silhouette, it would be fuzzy, it would be shady. And only later in the episodes would you see faces come into focus. You would see,
so beautiful.
I was like,
masterful. Wow. It's so deep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't notice this.
It's so great. Like, I just love that. And that's the details that come out later. Like, I was talking to a bunch of the people who work on Tacoma FD and who were working on, the Broken Lizard film Quasi, which we're just wrapping up. They worked on set deck in the art department on, Workaholics. And they're just like, every wiener that is in the background. And I was like, there are wieners in the background? He's like, I put every wiener in that show. And then you go and look, and there are literally just phalluses everywhere. Because that's just like the type of jokes and humor that the guys are doing all the time. And it's just, what you're reminding me of right now. And I'm so happy talking about this. Like, it just brings me so much joy to see that level of just beauty in the production side that comes and is inferred from the writing. Right.
Yes, exactly right.
That person knew to do that because of what is happening with that character and the story they're going through. And if the story wasn't done well, that level, that masterful, beautiful detail wouldn't exist.
That's right. And I wouldn't have, and we didn't put any of that in the script. We're like, hey, in the background, all the stuff is going to be silhouette, but in later episodes, it's going to be full. Like, I wouldn't have. That's not my job. My job is to tell a story. And if you were to put that detail in your script, I think it gets kind of like, what's this person doing? Like, why are you focusing on it? Just tell me a story and let the other people do their jobs. And that's what they did. The set decorator did their job. The set, everyone else did their jobs based on the story.
Yeah. So this is just like taking me back. And I remember when I first started, like probably the first words I ever wrote of screenplay was very much like a D&D description. You're in a room, there were 4 chairs, right? There's a wall painting on the wall, and it's just bad writing. And I think that, as someone who read a lot, well, in a novel, you're doing that. You're describing it because you can't see it. You're describing what's happening and what's in the room to give a feel. And now I read, young writers, friends who've self-published things, and I was like, oh my gosh, just get to the story already. Because I don't care. Like, we're a spending way too much time describing the doorknob here, guys. Like, that's not actually going to pay off anywhere, and you've wasted brain space.
Yeah.
And that comes from writing and just learning to cut and cut and cut. I think one of the best things, my friend Julian, he did an awesome thing once. He read something. He asked me to write something for him to shoot, and I wrote it, and he gave me notes back, and he had highlighted and crossed through every time something felt redundant that I'd already said. And there was a lot of red ink on the page. And he's like, and I was like, oh man, is it like that? He was like, no, I love the way you write. It's just, I learned he went to another film school before coming to mine. He's like, I just learned in film school from a pro, like, cut everything that doesn't need to be there. And I was like, okay. Exactly right. And it helped my writing exponentially.
That's interesting. Because it's interesting because obviously that's what I do when I'm TV. If there's not one word that doesn't need to be in the script, you take it out. Or if it's redundant, take it out. But when I'm writing my collection of personal essays, which I'm working on, sometimes I go too fast and I don't describe it enough, or I don't describe because I'm so concerned with keeping it moving. So that's something I've had to do when I do my rewriting. It's like, okay, slow it down a little bit. Let's describe the scene a little bit more. Let's set the tone, the mood. So that's something I have to be conscious of because it's a different medium that I'm working in as opposed to writing a script.
It is just a different medium, right? It's not all writing is the same. There's prose, there's all kinds of things. And this is just, it's a, I mean, you could say it's an art form, right? You're using this art form. And again, to hammer art versus craft, you're just the craftsman who can come in and make the thing be what it needs to be.
That's the goal.
Right? You see the wood, right? You see the wood and you're able to carve it into something beautiful.
That
takes
the intention. Time. Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah.
But all right.
Well, cool. Did you have any other thoughts on related to this though? Like people who are just like, oh, I need to sell my script. I can jump the ladder. When you first started this, I was just reminded, and I talk about this documentary all the time. I think everybody should watch. Last I checked, it was on Netflix, but it's called Showrunners. And, they go and they interview J.J. Abrams. They interview, Ray, and they interview all these people. And one of the things that I remember, they interview I can't remember his name, and I apologize, but it's the head of the Showrunners training program for the Writers Guild of America. And he points out, and I think an executive even pointed out, there are all these levels, right? There's writers PA, writer's assistant, script coordinator, staff writer. He says, I think everyone should go through that process because you learn at every single level and it builds and builds and builds.
Yeah.
Do you have any other advice for people, like where they should be spending their time and energy, things to be focusing on? I mean, you have a pretty good list earlier. I think people can go back to minute 2 or 3 of this thing, but.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think you're right. Don't skip those levels and don't, people think, I want to run my own show. And that was never my goal. My goal was to be a staff writer on a show so I could learn how to write. And so learn how to write first, and then everything will fall into place. And don't be so concerned about skipping levels. And why do you want to start at the top? Oh my God, that sounds like an awful idea. It sounds awful. The pressure would be crippling,
Yeah.
Start at the bottom.
Yeah. I mean, it was something else I heard that some other showrunners say once. It's like, you're getting asked 1 million questions a day. Like, what kind of hat do you like?
Yeah.
What time? You wrote into our point, you wrote in the script that he used an ashtray. Well, here's 7 ashtrays.
Yes.
Which one do you like? Right. Okay. None of these. We can get as many ashtrays as you'd like. Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions. When you're a showrunner. Yeah.
Yeah.
But all right.
Good stuff. And I think it's a good podcast. I think it's a good episode.
I hope so. I hope this is helpful. And we'll be back with more helpful episodes. Tell people what they can expect, Phil.
From this podcast?
I don't know. From us in general. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, and look, we've got enough out right now that we're getting a lot of feedback. And some of the feedback I'm getting is, it's what I hoped from this, which is 2 different perspectives on what it's like to be a writer.
Yeah.
You, someone who's been doing it for a long time, myself, who's around this stuff now at a professional level. I'm the producer's assistant on this new film. I'm sitting in, rewrites. I'm watching people craft jokes. I'm watching them do all this stuff. And the feedback I'm getting is it's great to see those 2 perspectives. It's important to hear both. So you're going to hear that. You're going to hear what your experience actually is and what my naive, bad questions are, because I'm going to ask those questions for you. A lot of times I'm asking questions I already know the answer to because I know they're questions I had and I know they're questions other people have asked me.
Yeah.
And I think it's great for people to get that information. So the big thing for me is we're going to break down fallacies and bad thinking that will hopefully expedite your path and process to save you a few years off of the decade plus I've been trying to do this. You know?
Right.
That's what I think you're going to get out of this.
All right, then. So that's it. Stay tuned, everyone, for our next episode. Now we drop new episodes every Wednesday. Thanks for
make your hump day a little better, right?
That's right. Make your hump day less humpy.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
This has been an episode of Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin and Phil Hudson. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with someone who needs to hear today's subject. If you're looking to support yourself, I'd encourage you to consider investing in Michael's screenwriting course at michaeljamin.com/course. I've known Michael for over a decade, and in the past 7 years, I've begged him to put something together. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, Michael had time, and I have to say, I wish I'd had this course 10 years ago. As someone who's personally invested in most online courses, earned a bachelor's degree, and actively studied screenwriting for over a decade, this course has been more valuable to me than most of the effort I've put in because it focuses on something no one else teaches: story. In his course, Michael pulls back the curtain and shows you exactly what the pros do in a writer's room, and that knowledge has made all the difference for me, and I know it will for you too. You can find more information at michaeljamin.com/course. For free daily screenwriting tips, follow Michael on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at michaeljaminwriter. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Phil A. Hudson. This episode was produced by Phil Hudson and edited by Dallas Crane. Until next time, keep writing.